My name is Emily Carson. I'm 28 years old, and last December I nearly died in a hospital room without a single member of my family at my side. I wasn't in a car crash. I wasn't attacked. I went into anaphylactic shock because of a dog, my sister's dog to be exact, the one my parents bought for her even though they knew I had a severe allergy to animal dander, the one they let roam around their home while insisting I just take some pills if I ever wanted to visit. The one that ultimately triggered the worst allergic reaction of my life and nearly stopped my heart. But that's not the part that still haunts me. What keeps me awake at night is what happened after I was rushed to the hospital unconscious. What happened when the doctors trying to save me called my parents and begged them to come. "We can't," my mother replied. "Rebecca is out walking her dog and we have to pick her up soon." Even when the doctor warned them that it might be my last night alive, they didn't come. Not that night, not the next day, not even a phone call. I lay there intubated with tubes in my arms and machines doing the work of keeping me breathing, and my parents, Harold and Karen Carson, couldn't be bothered to show up. It took them an entire week to finally make the trip to the hospital, and by then, I was gone. Not dead, but discharged and waiting. I had left behind one thing for them, a single letter folded neatly on the bed I had nearly died in. The nurse placed it right where my head had rested. It wasn't addressed with names, just two words written in bold black ink. "Read this." I would later learn from the nurse that when they read it, my father's face turned red, then pale, then expressionless. My mother sat down hard on the edge of the bed and didn't speak for almost 5 minutes. They had finally shown up, but too late for everything that mattered. That letter wasn't just a message, it was a reckoning. But before we get there, let me take you back to the beginning. Let me show you what led to that hospital bed, to that final letter, to the moment my family finally saw me. Not as the quiet daughter, not as the easy one, but as the woman who refused to be invisible any longer. If you've ever felt like the extra child, the afterthought, the one they called strong, just so they wouldn't have to care about your pain, this story is for you. I was diagnosed with severe asthma and animal dander allergies when I was 4. By age 6, I carried an inhaler everywhere and had a strict no-pet policy. My parents didn't complain then. They followed doctor orders and even replaced our carpets with hardwood to help my breathing. But everything changed when my little sister Rebecca was born. I was 7, and from the very beginning she sparkled in their eyes. Blonde curls, loud laughter, a face that demanded attention. Rebecca was sunshine according to our mom. I was mature for my age, independent, and as my mother loved to say, so low maintenance. What she really meant was that I didn't need much from her, so she gave me nothing. When I had an asthma attack at school in the 3rd grade, the nurse couldn't reach either of my parents. They were both at Rebecca's ballet recital. I was sent home in a cab with a teacher. That became a pattern. Missed parent-teacher conferences. Forgotten birthdays. Rebecca had full-blown parties with themes, cakes, and performances. I got dinner at a chain restaurant. My father once told me, "You don't need all that stuff. You're the smart one." It sounded like a compliment. It wasn't. It was permission for them to ignore me. By high school, I stopped inviting them to my track meets. I told myself I didn't care. When I got into Rutgers with a scholarship, my mother barely reacted. "That's nice, dear," she said, flipping through Rebecca's portfolio for an Instagram modeling submission. I took a job at a furniture store to pay for textbooks. Rebecca, meanwhile, failed out of her 2nd year at community college and received a brand new Audi for emotional support. It wasn't just favoritism, it was abandonment disguised as praise. Every time I brought up how I felt, my mother would sigh and say, "Not everything is about you, Emily. Don't be so dramatic." That phrase followed me like a ghost. Don't be so dramatic. When I broke my wrist freshman year, my mom didn't visit. When I had the flu so badly I couldn't stand, she sent a DoorDash code and a thumbs-up emoji. I told myself it was fine. I was the strong one, the reliable one, the invisible one. Until I wasn't. Until I almost died because they once again prioritized Rebecca's comfort over my existence. And even then, even with my lungs collapsing and my pulse slowing in an emergency room, they stayed loyal to their favorite child and her damn dog. That dog, Charlie, is a Samoyed. Big, fluffy, and expensive. Rebecca's dream. My nightmare. When they brought him home, I reminded them I was deathly allergic. "He'll stay in Rebecca's room," my mother said, brushing me off. But soon he had the run of the house, climbing on furniture, leaving fur everywhere. I stopped visiting. When I told them it broke my heart to miss holidays, my mom said, "You're being sensitive again. Just take some allergy pills." It was always my job to bend, to shrink, to survive in their house on their terms. But I was done shrinking. I was done surviving quietly. That night in the hospital changed everything. It made me see the truth I had spent a lifetime avoiding. I was not their daughter. I was their obligation, and barely that. My mother, Karen Carson, was a beloved figure in our town. She ran community fundraisers, organized church events, and was even interviewed once on local news for her exceptional commitment to family values. She knew how to present the perfect image. My father, Harold, was quieter but respected. A retired accountant, steady and responsible, the kind of man who helped neighbors file taxes every spring and coached Little League when Rebecca was younger. To outsiders, we were the Carson family, stable, respectable, close-knit. No one knew the truth. No one saw the way my mother weaponized kindness, turning her charitable energy outward so she could ignore what was happening inside her own home. No one saw the way she manipulated narratives to protect Rebecca from any real consequences, no matter how irresponsible or cruel she was. No one saw how my father stood by silent and complicit while I was left out of photo frames and family group texts. When I tried to speak up, I became difficult. I remember one Thanksgiving when I asked why Rebecca got to invite 5 friends to dinner while I was told there wasn't enough room at the table for my boyfriend. My mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "Rebecca brings life to this house. You bring tension." I left before dessert. No one called to check on me. I think part of me still hoped they would. When Rebecca turned 24, she got it into her head that she needed an emotional support dog. She'd read an article about how Samoyeds were great for Instagram engagement and convinced herself it would help her brand. Never mind that she still lived at home, had no steady income, and had never kept a plant alive. She cried to our parents, saying her anxiety was out of control. I knew her. I knew the tears were part performance, part manipulation. And it worked. Within a week, Charlie arrived, white, fluffy, beautiful, and absolutely toxic for me. I didn't find out until they posted photos online. When I called, panicking, my mother's voice was calm. "Don't overreact, Emily. Just don't visit when Rebecca's home." "She lives there," I replied. "Exactly," my mom said. "So you understand the situation." I didn't visit for 5 months. Not for Christmas, not for Rebecca's birthday party, which my mother sent me photos of afterward with a note. "Wish you could have been there." They always acted like it was my choice to stay away. Like I was exiling myself for attention. When I sent a heartfelt email explaining how hurt I was, I got a 2-word reply. "Noted. Thanks." It was like screaming into a void. Rebecca, of course, continued to flourish. With Charlie as her prop, her social media grew. Sponsorships paid posts, affiliate codes. Her mental health journey became a storyline complete with curated photos of her sipping tea while wrapped in blankets with the dog curled beside her. One of the captions read, "This fluff saved my life." The irony was nauseating. I wondered if she ever considered that he nearly ended mine. My mother became her manager of sorts, handling emails and attending events with her. They posted selfies together, beaming with matching shirts that read "Dog Mom" and "Dog Aunt." I was nowhere in those posts, not even a tag. When I confronted Rebecca during a rare phone call, asking if she understood what Charlie was doing to my health, she sighed. "You always make everything so serious, Em. Maybe you should get a dog, too. It might help you relax." I hung up, and I knew then this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. This was a family that had made a choice, and it wasn't me. In the days after I was discharged from the hospital, before I moved out of the city, and before I posted anything online, I started keeping a journal, not for therapy, but for clarity. I needed to see the pattern to stop gaslighting myself about what had happened all those years. I didn't want to believe my parents were cruel, but cruelty isn't always screaming or hitting. Sometimes it's silence, a lifetime of silence. I wrote down every memory that surfaced. Each one felt like a puzzle piece that had been there all along. I just hadn't seen the picture. When I was 10, Rebecca spilled grape juice all over my science fair poster. I had worked on it for weeks. I cried. My mom told me to stop being dramatic. She's just a kid. When I was 16, I came home shaking after being followed by a stranger on my way home from school. I told my dad. He barely looked up from the newspaper. "You're fine," he said, "probably just your imagination." When Rebecca failed her driving test twice, she got a third appointment booked and a new car waiting for motivation. When I passed on my first try, I had to share the old family minivan. When I was 19 and went to the ER alone for what turned out to be pneumonia, my mom texted, "Get some rest," and then didn't follow up for 3 days. When I finally called her, she was at a dog grooming appointment with Rebecca. "You sounded okay, Emily. I figured you'd let me know if it was serious. It was always like that. Always." I began to realize I had trained myself to be okay, even when I wasn't just to survive, because asking for care meant being dismissed. Needing attention meant being a burden. I even remembered smaller things, like how my birthday gifts were practical socks, kitchenware books on productivity, while Rebecca got trips clothes and spa days. At first, I thought it was because I was more responsible, but now I knew the truth. They gave her joy and gave me function, because I was there to hold the family's emotional weight while she got to be their star. My mom once told me, "You're the glue that holds everyone together." It sounded beautiful, until I realized glue is meant to be invisible, silent, sacrificed, and disposable when it's done its job. I even remembered a particular Thanksgiving, the last one I attended. Rebecca had recently started dating someone new and he was invited to dinner. I had just gotten a promotion and shared the news over mashed potatoes. My mom said, "That's nice, honey," then turned and said to Rebecca's boyfriend, "So, what do you do?" No follow-up, no excitement, just dismissal. Like my wins didn't fit the family narrative. Rebecca was the one who needed constant support, and I was the one who didn't need anything. Until I did. Until I was unconscious in a hospital bed, organs shutting down, body covered in hives. And they still didn't come. That was when I realized the favoritism wasn't just emotional. It was life-threatening. It wasn't a preference. It was policy. And if I didn't sever ties, it would eventually kill me. Not just physically, but spiritually, psychologically, piece by piece. I had spent 28 years writing excuses in my head for every slight, every forgotten moment, every dismissal. That journal became the first thing I ever wrote just for myself. No excuses, no filters, just truth. It hurt to look at, but I kept going, because for the first time in my life, I needed to see it clearly. All of it. And when I did, I stopped calling it a misunderstanding. I called it what it was: abuse in pastel colors. Rejection neatly wrapped in civility. Gaslighting disguised as parenting. Every memory a clue, every clue a warning. It started with a headache and a scratchy throat. I thought it was a cold, maybe exhaustion. I had been working long hours on a client project and barely sleeping. When the tightness in my chest began, I assumed it was anxiety. I took my inhaler, drank water, tried to breathe through it, but it didn't stop. It got worse. That morning, I had driven to my parents' house for what was supposed to be a reconciliation dinner. My mother had called unusually warm, inviting me over. She promised Rebecca wouldn't be home and that they'd cleaned the house thoroughly. "Just the three of us," she said. "Lasagna and that cheesecake you love." I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that maybe something had changed. So I came. I brought a bottle of wine and wore my nicest sweater. As soon as I walked in, I saw the white fur on the couch, heard the bark, felt the panic rise. "He's here," I asked. "Charlie." "Of course," my mother said casually. "Rebecca's staying the weekend." "But you said—" "You'll be fine," she cut me off. "Just take one of your pills." My father greeted me with a smile. "Dinner's almost ready." I stayed. I shouldn't have. But I stayed, because I didn't want to be the difficult one again, the dramatic one, the problem. By dessert, my skin was covered in hives. My throat was tight, my breathing ragged. Rebecca, lounging with the dog in her lap, looked at me and said, "You okay?" "You look weird." "It's your dog," I croaked. "I'm having a reaction." My mother frowned. "Honestly, Emily, you've had dinner and cake. How bad can it be?" I left without another word. Drove myself home with shaking hands. Stopped at a pharmacy, grabbed antihistamines. sat in my car, heart pounding, vision blurring, and popped the pills like candy. The next morning, I could barely stand. The reaction hadn't subsided. It had worsened. My skin burned, my chest felt crushed. I called my doctor, left a voicemail, then got in an Uber to the hospital because I couldn't trust myself to drive. I barely made it through the ER doors before I collapsed. Nurses rushed me to a bed, hooked me up to IVs, epinephrine, oxygen. The last thing I remember clearly is one of them saying, "Call her emergency contacts." This is escalating fast. They called my parents, multiple times, left messages. When they finally reached them, it was a nurse named Ava who spoke. I asked her later what they said, her face twisted with something between anger and pity. "Your mom said they couldn't come, that they had to pick up your sister from the dog park. We told them you might not make it through the night, and they didn't come. I was intubated, alone. Friends came. My colleague Lisa stayed the first night. A neighbor came by, but my blood chose a walk in the park over their daughter's life. The next morning I stabilized. Barely. I stayed in ICU for 2 more days. I asked every nurse who entered, did my parents come? They all shook their heads. No. 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 I kept my phone off. I didn't want another text from my mother asking if I was feeling better yet. I didn't want an apology delayed by 7 days of silence. On the 3rd night, I cried myself to sleep, not from fear, from clarity, because for the first time I saw it with no filter. They had never truly loved me, not in the way I needed, not in the way that mattered, and I would not let that kind of love kill me. Not again. Not ever. In the quiet hum of the ICU, surrounded by machines keeping me alive, it wasn't my family who showed up. It was people who didn't owe me anything. The first was Lisa, my coworker, barely more than a lunch buddy before all this. She stayed with me the night I was admitted, even though I hadn't asked. She brought socks from the gift shop because my feet were cold. She sat beside me and read silently while I drifted in and out of consciousness. She didn't talk much, just held space, and somehow that was exactly what I needed. The second was Nurse Ava. Middle-aged, tough but kind, with streaks of gray in her hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She was the one who called my parents. She was also the one who, when they declined to come, looked at me with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. No daughter should hear that she said. She wasn't supposed to share what they said, but she did. Quietly. Carefully. Like a woman who knew some truths need to be heard regardless of policy. Then there was the elderly woman down the hall, Mrs. Donnelly, who heard about me from Ava. She was a retired teacher in for a knee replacement and insisted on bringing over her homemade soup the moment she was discharged. "I've seen this before," she said. "Golden child, forgotten child. Don't let them tell you your worth is measured in how quiet you can be." These people strangers just days before became my lifeline. While my family sent nothing, these people brought blankets, books, small comforts. They held my hand through the long nights. They listened without interruption. No guilt, no dismissal, just care. My therapist, Dr. Ellen Ward, entered my life shortly after. A recommendation from Lisa, she visited me once in the hospital before we began formal sessions. Her first words were simple: "You are not crazy, you are not too sensitive, you were neglected." And that validation spoken so plainly broke something open inside me. I had spent my entire life trying to be less needy, less emotional, less visible. These strangers reminded me I didn't have to disappear to be loved. One afternoon, Ava wheeled me outside to breathe fresh air. As we sat under the winter sun, she said, "I've worked in this hospital 22 years. I've seen people pass with 10 family members holding their hands. And I've seen them go alone. But I've never seen anyone whose family actively refused to come when they were told it might be the end." She paused, her voice hardening. "You don't need their permission to stop waiting." That day, something in me shifted. I realized that love wasn't proven by blood. It was proven by presence. And in my darkest moment, the people who came weren't the ones who raised me. They were the ones who chose to show up. And that choice, that mattered more than any DNA. I wrote the letter on my 4th night in the hospital. Still hooked to monitors, my hands trembling from medication, I asked Nurse Ava for a pen and some paper. She brought me a clipboard and said, Take your time. Say what you need to say. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a declaration, a severance, a record. I started it like a case file. Date, time, room number. To my parents, I wrote, "By the time you read this, I will be gone, not dead, but gone from your reach. Not because I vanished, but because I finally chose myself." For the next several pages, I laid out everything. Not just the hospital night. Not just Charlie. Everything. Every memory that had been gnawing at the corners of my sanity for the past 28 years. Every wound they called exaggeration. I described the Thanksgiving where I wasn't allowed to bring my partner. The night I broke my wrist and waited 5 hours for a ride that never came. The way they praised Rebecca for getting out of bed but ignored my degrees, my career, my life. You always said I was the strong one I wrote, but you used that as an excuse to leave me bleeding. I included copies of medical forms, screenshots of the allergy report from when I was 5, the voicemail transcript from the hospital call. I even printed out Rebecca's Instagram post from the day I was admitted a selfie at the dog park with the caption, "Charlie needed a big day after his bath, #FurBabyFirst." The timestamp was the same hour the ER had called my parents. I ended the letter with one final line, "I'm not writing this to make you feel guilty. I'm writing this so you can never say you didn't know." I folded the pages neatly and sealed them in a manila envelope. On the front, I wrote in thick black marker, "Read this." Ava promised she would leave it on the hospital bed if I was discharged before they arrived, but I didn't stop there. The next day, I scanned the letter and attached it to an email. The recipients, my parents, of course, but also extended family, mutual family friends, members of the church committee, where my mom volunteered, and several colleagues from my dad's retirement group. It wasn't rage. It wasn't revenge. It was documentation, proof, the truth finally unhidden. Then I posted it online, not the full letter, but an excerpt just enough. A photo of my IV-covered hand, the words, "I almost died this week." My parents didn't come. My sister's dog had a walk scheduled. Within 12 hours, it had been shared 15,000 times. Within a day, 70,000. Messages flooded in, stories from other invisible daughters, support from strangers. Even a local journalist asked to speak with me. I declined. The story wasn't for headlines, it was for the record. A week later, when my parents finally walked into the hospital room expecting perhaps a quiet apology or a second chance, all they found was an empty bed and an envelope. Ava told me later that my mother sat down without a word and didn't move for 20 minutes. My father stood still, holding the pages, his face pale and expressionless. No one spoke. No one asked questions. No one denied a single word. Because how could they? Everything was dated, proven, undeniable. They left the hospital without saying a word to anyone. 2 days later, my phone rang. I didn't answer. My voicemail lit up Emily. "This is your mother. We received your letter. I think you're being very dramatic about all this. We've done our best. Call when you're ready to be reasonable." I played it once, then deleted it. They had no idea. This wasn't about reason. This was about reckoning. This wasn't me lashing out. This was me stepping out from their version of me, from their narrative, from the role I was cast into since childhood. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. That letter wasn't the beginning of revenge. It was the end of pretending. And that was the most powerful thing I'd ever written. I never intended for the story to go viral, but once it did, it took on a life of its own. The post with my letter excerpt was shared across social media platforms, screenshot and reposted on forums, parenting blogs, and chronic illness support groups. Comments poured in by the hundreds, thousands. Most were kind, empathetic, outraged on my behalf. But what shook me were the ones from people who knew my family. Wait, is this Karen Carson from St. Luke's Church? Is this Harold who runs the retiree tax group? This can't be Rebecca, the wellness influencer, right? But it was. And suddenly, the curated image they had spent decades building began to crumble. My mother, known in town as a compassionate community organizer, was quietly removed from 2 local nonprofit boards. Word spread that there were calls and complaints sent to the committees. How can someone so publicly devoted to family be so privately heartless? The irony wasn't lost on anyone. My father received an official request from his financial advisory group to step back from public representation. His face no longer appeared on their website. Former colleagues began to distance themselves. No dramatic confrontation, just polite withdrawal. Rebecca lost several brand sponsorships within days. Pet product companies didn't want to be associated with her name. Her comment sections turned toxic. Fans asked hard questions. Is it true you let your sister nearly die? Where were you when she was in the ICU? She responded once an Instagram story that vanished in 24 hours. It read, "People believe what they want. I know my truth, love and light. But the damage was done." Her follower count dropped by the thousands. A Reddit thread dedicated to influencer accountability dissected her posts, comparing timestamps, captions, even the breed of dog she claimed was hypoallergenic. It wasn't. And people knew it. Meanwhile, I changed my emergency contacts. I removed my parents' names from medical records, insurance forms, legal documents. I updated my will. I called my bank, my landlord, my HR department. If these people call, do not speak to them. Do not let them near my records. The hospital where I had nearly died added a note to my chart. Parents are not to be contacted. I felt no guilt, not a shred, because this wasn't vengeance. This was a firewall. This was protection. This was how I made sure that if I ever landed in a hospital bed again, I wouldn't be waiting for ghosts. They had shown me who they were. I was just acting accordingly. I received a few more voicemails in the days after. My father left one. It was quieter than my mother's. "We're trying to understand. This all seems bigger than what we thought." Then, silence. No apology. No ownership. Just confusion that the world had seen them for who they were. Rebecca didn't call. She sent one text. "Hope you're doing okay." I never replied. The distance between us was now a canyon, not just from the dog or the hospital stay, but from a lifetime of imbalance, a lifetime of me being the lesson and her being the exception. Their public collapse wasn't my goal, but it was their consequence, a direct result of decades of choices they made and dismissed, and for once, I wasn't the one cleaning up the mess. I was watching it fall brick by brick from a place of safety, of silence, of peace. 2 weeks after I left the hospital, I packed up my apartment and moved to a quiet coastal town in Maine. No fanfare, no goodbye party. Just me, a small U-Haul, and the weight of freedom sitting quietly in the passenger seat. The air was cleaner there literally and metaphorically. I rented a cottage on a cliff overlooking the water. It had large windows, white walls, and no carpet. No pets, no family. Just space. I spent the first week sleeping, 14 hours at a time. My body needed rest. My mind needed silence. When I finally unpacked, I hung nothing on the walls. I didn't want reminders. I wanted space to rebuild. Dr. Ward, my therapist, agreed to continue sessions virtually. We focused on boundaries, on grief, on what it meant to mourn parents who were still alive. She told me something I'll never forget. "You've spent your entire life surviving by minimizing your needs. Now your healing will come from honoring them." So I did. I honored them. I said no to calls I didn't want. I let texts go unanswered. I stopped explaining myself. I also said yes to walks by the shore, to baking bread from scratch, to meeting the local bookstore owner for tea. People knew my name, not my story. That felt safe. That felt mine. I also found a chronic illness support group online. We met weekly, shared stories. I wasn't alone anymore. Not the way I had been before. I told them about the hospital, about the letter, about the silence that followed. They didn't flinch. They nodded. Same one woman said, "Mine left me after my diagnosis too." It was strange how comforting it felt to be understood by strangers when your own family never bothered to try. I wasn't healed. Not fully, but I was safe. I was building something new, and every day I reminded myself I'm not strong because they abandoned me. I'm strong because I finally stopped waiting for them to come back. To the daughters who were called dramatic for crying, selfish for speaking up, or ungrateful for needing more, this is for you. To the women who sat quietly at family dinners while their achievements were ignored, while their siblings were celebrated for simply existing, this is your reminder. You were never the problem. You were simply inconvenient to a narrative they refused to change. I spent 28 years trying to be good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough to earn what should have been freely given love, safety, attention. I twisted myself into something digestible, something obedient, something invisible. And still they looked past me, until I stopped allowing it. The night I almost died alone in that hospital bed wasn't just a medical emergency, it was a reckoning. It forced a question I had been too scared to ask. If I had died that night, would anything about our dynamic have changed? The answer hurt, but it was honest, and honesty has a way of lighting the path forward. So I wrote the letter. I told the truth, and I walked away. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. I wasn't just severing ties. I was reclaiming my story, my life, my worth. And if you're reading this nodding, crying, remembering all the ways you made yourself small to keep peace, you can reclaim yours too. You don't have to wait until they almost let you die. You don't need permission to leave the table where you're only fed crumbs. You can build your own table. Set it with dignity. Invite people who bring peace, not pain. Forgiveness is optional. Healing is essential. And family is not who shares your blood. It's who shows up when it matters. It's who stays when it's hard. It's who sees you fully and loves you anyway. I used to think I needed my parents to change to heal. I don't anymore. I needed me to choose me. And I did. And so can you.